This week's Grimm Fairy Tales: The Wishing Table, the Ass, and the Cudgle. There was once upon a time a tailor who had 3 sons and only 1 goat. But as the goat supported the whole of them with her milk, she was obliged to have good food and to be taken every day to pasture. The sons therefore did this in turn. Once the eldest took her to the churchyard, where the finest herbs were to be found, and let her eat and run about there. At night, when it was time to go home, he asked, "Goat, hast thou had enough?" The goat answered, "I have eaten so much, not a leaf more I'll touch. Meh, meh." "Come on home then," said the youth, and took hold of the cord round her neck, led her into the stable, and tied her up securely.
"Well," said the old tailor, "has the goat had as much food as she ought?"
"Oh," answered the son, "she has eaten so much, not a leaf more she'll touch." But the father wished to satisfy himself, and went down to the stables, stroked the dear animal, and asked,
"Goat, art thou satisfied?"
The goat answered,
"Wherewithal should I be satisfied? Among the graves I leapt about, and found no food, so went without. Meh, meh."
"What do I hear?"
cried the tailor, and ran upstairs and said to the youth,
"Hollo, thou liar! Thou saidst the goat had had enough, and hast let her hunger."
And in his anger he took the yard measure from the wall and drove him out with blows. Next day it was the turn of the second son, who looked out for a place in the fence of the garden, where nothing but good herbs grew, and the goat cleared them all off. At night, when he wanted to go home, he asked,
"Goat, art thou satisfied?"
The goat answered,
"I have eaten so much, not a leaf more I'll touch. Meh, meh."
"Come home then," said the youth, and led her home and tied her up in the stable.
"Well,"
said the old tailor,
"has the goat had as much food as she ought?"
"Oh," answered the son, "she has eaten so much, not a leaf more she'll touch." The tailor would not rely on this, but went down to the stable and said,
"Goat, hast thou had enough?"
The goat answered,
"Wherewithal should I be satisfied? Among the graves I leapt about, and found no food, so went without. Meh, meh."
"The godless wretch!"
cried the tailor,
"to let such a good animal hunger."
and he ran up and drove the youth out of doors with the yard measure. Now came the turn of the third son, who wanted to do the thing well, and sought out some bushes with the finest leaves, and let the goat devour them. In the evening, when he wanted to go home, he asked, "Goat, hast thou had enough?" The goat answered,
"I have eaten so much, not a leaf more I'll touch. Meh, meh."
"Come home then," said the youth, and led her into the stable and tied her up.
"Well,"
said the old tailor,
"has the goat had a proper amount of food?"
"She has eaten so much, not a leaf more she'll touch." The tailor did not trust to that, but went down and asked,
"Goat, hast thou had enough?"
The wicked beast answered,
"Wherewithal should I be satisfied? Among the graves I leapt about, and found no food, so went without. Meh, meh."
"Oh, the brood of liars!"
cried the tailor,
"each as wicked and forgetful of his duty as the other. Ye shall no longer make a fool of me."
And quite beside himself with anger, he ran upstairs and belabored the poor young fellow so vigorously with the yard measure that he sprang out of the house. The old tailor was now alone with his goat. Next morning he went down into the stable, caressed the goat and said,
"Come, my dear little animal, I will take thee to feed myself."
He took her by the rope and conducted her to green hedges and amongst milfoil and whatever else goats like to eat.
"There, thou mayest for once eat to thy heart's content,"
said he to her, and let her browse till evening. Then he asked,
"Goat, art thou satisfied?"
She replied,
I have eaten so much, not a leaf more I'll touch. Meh, meh.
"Come home then,"
said the tailor, and led her into the stable and tied her fast. When he was going away, he turned round again and said,
"Well, art thou satisfied for once?"
But the goat did not behave the better to him, and cried,
Wherewithal should I be satisfied? Among the graves I leapt about, and found no food, so went without. Meh, meh.
When the tailor heard that, he was shocked, and saw clearly that he had driven away his 3 sons without cause.
"Wait, thou ungrateful creature,"
he cried.
"it is not enough to drive thee forth. I will mark thee so that thou wilt no more dare to show thyself amongst honest tailors."
In great haste he ran upstairs, fetched his razor, lathered the goat's head, and shaved her as clean as the palm of his hand. And as the yard measure would have been too good for her, he brought the horsewhip and gave her such cuts with it that she ran away in violent haste. When the tailor was thus left quite alone in his house, he fell into great grief, and would gladly have his sons back again, but no one knew whither they were gone. The eldest had apprenticed himself to a joiner, and learnt industriously and indefatigably, and when the time came for him to go traveling, his master presented him with a little table which had no particular appearance, and was made of common wood. But it had one good property, if anyone set it out and said, "Little table, spread thyself." The good little table was at once covered with a clean little cloth, and a plate was there, and a knife and fork beside it, and dishes with boiled meats and roasted meats, as many as there was room for, and a great glass of red wine shone so that it made the heart glad. The young journeyman thought, "With this thou hast enough for thy whole life," and went joyously about the world, and never troubled himself at all whether an inn was good or bad, or if anything was to be found in it or not. When it suited him, he did not enter an inn at all, but either on the plain, in a wood, a meadow, or wherever he fancied, he took his little table off his back, set it down before him, and said, "Cover thyself." And then everything appeared that his heart desired. At length he took it into his head to go back to his father, whose anger would now be appeased, and who would now willingly receive him with his wishing table. It came to pass that on his way home, he came one evening to an inn which was filled with guests. They bade him welcome and invited him to sit and eat with them, for otherwise he would have difficulty in getting anything. "No," answered the joiner, "I will not take the few bites out of your mouths. Rather than that, you shall be my guests." They laughed and thought he was jesting with them. He, however, placed his wooden table in the middle of the room and said, "Little table, cover thyself." Instantly, it was covered with food, so good that the host could never have procured it, and the smell of it ascended pleasantly to the nostrils of the guests. "Fall to, dear friends," said the joiner, and the guests, when they saw that he meant it, did not need to be asked twice, but drew near, pulled out their knives and attacked it valiantly. And what surprised them the most was that when a dish became empty, a full one instantly took its place of its own accord. The innkeeper stood in one corner and watched the affair, He did not at all know what to say, but thought, "Thou couldst easily find a use for such a cook as that in thy kitchen." The joiner and his comrades made merry until late into the night. At length they lay down to sleep, and the young apprentice also went to bed and set his magic table against the wall. The host's thoughts, however, let him have no rest. It occurred to him that there was a little old table in his lumber room which looked just like the apprentice's, and he brought it out quite softly and exchanged it for the wishing table. Next morning, the joiner paid for his bed, took up his table, never thinking that he had got a false one, and went on his way. At midday, he reached his father, who received him with great joy.
"Well, my dear son, what hast thou learnt?"
said he to him. "Father, I have become a joiner."
"A good trade,"
replied the old man.
"but what hast thou brought back with thee from thy apprenticeship?"
"Father, the best thing which I have brought back with me is this little table." The tailor inspected it on all sides and said,
"Thou did not make a masterpiece when thou madest that. It is a bad old table."
"But it is a table which furnishes itself," replied the son. "When I set it out and tell it to cover itself, the most beautiful dishes stand on it, and a wine also, which gladdens the heart. Just invite all our relations and friends. They shall refresh and enjoy themselves for once, for the table will give them all they require." When the company was assembled, he put his table in the middle of the room and said, "Little table, cover thyself." But the little table did not bestir itself, and remained just as bare as any other table which did not understand language. Then the poor apprentice became aware that his table had been changed, and was ashamed at having to stand there like a liar. The relations, however, mocked him, and were forced to go home without having eaten or drunk. The father brought out his patches again, and went on tailoring, but the son went to a master in the craft. The second son had gone to a miller, and had apprenticed himself to him. When his years were over, the master said, "As thou hast conducted thyself so well, I give thee an ass of a peculiar kind, which neither draws a cart nor carries a sack."
To what use is he put then?
asked the young apprentice. "He lets gold drop from his mouth," answered the miller. "If thou settest him on a cloth and sayest, 'Bricklebrit,' the good animal will drop a piece of gold for thee."
"That is a fine thing,"
said the apprentice, and thanked the master, and went out into the world. When he had need of gold, he had only to say,
"Bricklebrit,"
to his ass, and it rained gold pieces, and he had nothing to do but pick them off the ground. Wheresoever he went, the best of everything was good enough for him, and the dearer the better, for he had always a full purse. When he had looked about the world for some time, he thought,
"Thou must seek out thy father. If thou goest to him with the gold ass, he will forget his anger and receive thee well."
It came to pass that he came to the same public house in which his brother's table had been exchanged. He led his ass by the bridle, and the host was about to take the animal from him and tie him up, but the young apprentice said,
"Don't trouble yourself. I will take my gray horse into the stable and tie him up myself too, for I must know where he stands."
This struck the host as odd, and he thought that a man who was forced to look after his ass himself could not have much to spend. But when the stranger put his hand in his pocket and brought the 2 gold pieces, and said he was to provide something good for him, the host opened his eyes wide, and ran and sought out the best he could muster. After dinner, the guest asked what he owed. The host did not see why he should not double the reckoning, and said the apprentice must give 2 more gold pieces. He felt in his pocket, but his gold was just at an end.
"Wait an instant, Sir Host,"
said he.
"I will go and fetch some money."
But he took the tablecloth with him. The host could not imagine what this could mean, and being curious, stole after him. And as the guest bolted the stable door, he peeped through a hole left by a knot in the wood. The stranger spread out the cloth under the animal and cried,
"Bricklebrit."
And immediately the beast began to let gold pieces fall, so that it fairly rained down money on the ground. My word," said the host. "Ducats are quickly coined there. A purse like that is not amiss." The guest paid his score and went to bed, but in the night the host stole down into the stable, led away the master of the mint, and tied up another ass in his place. Early next morning the apprentice traveled away with his ass, and thought that he had his gold ass. At midday he reached his father, who rejoiced to see him again, and gladly took him in.
"What hast thou made of thyself, my son?"
asked the old man.
"A miller, dear father,"
he answered.
"What hast thou brought back with thee from thy travels?"
"Nothing else but an ass."
"There are asses enough here,"
said the father.
"I would rather have had a good goat."
"Yes,"
replied the son.
"but it is no common ass, but a gold ass. When I say Bricklebrit, the good beast opens its mouth and drops a whole sheetful of gold pieces. Just summon all our relations hither, and I will make them rich folks."
"That suits me well,"
said the tailor.
"for then I shall have no need to torment myself any longer with the needle."
And ran out himself and called the relations together. As soon as they were assembled, the miller bade them make way, spread out his cloth, and brought the ass into the room.
"Now watch,"
said he, and cried,
"Bricklebrit."
But no gold pieces fell, and it was clear that the animal knew nothing of the art, for every ass does not attain such perfection. Then the poor miller pulled a long face, saw that he was betrayed, and begged pardon of the relatives, who went home as poor as they came. There was no help for it. The old man had to betake him to his needle once more, and the youth hired himself to a miller. The third brother had apprenticed himself to a turner, and as that is skilled labor, he was the longest in learning. His brothers, however, told him in a letter how badly things had gone with them, and how the innkeeper had cheated them on their beautiful wishing gifts on the last evening before they reached home. When the turner had served his time, and had set out on his travels, as he had conducted himself so well, his master presented him with a sack and said,
"There is a cudgel in it."
"I can put on the sack," said he, "and it may be of good service to me, but why should the cudgel be in it? It only makes it heavy."
"I will tell thee why,"
replied the master.
"If anyone has done anything to injure thee, do but say, 'Out of the sack, cudgel,' and the cudgel will leap forth among the people and play such a dance on their backs that they will not be able to stir or move for a week, and it will not leave off until thou sayest, 'Into the sack, cudgel.'"
The apprentice thanked him and put the sack on his back, and when anyone came too near him and wished to attack him, he said, "Out of the sack, cudgel," and instantly the cudgel sprang out and dusted the coat or jacket of one after the other on their backs, and never stopped until it had stripped it off them, and it was done so quickly that before anyone was aware, it was already his own turn. In the evening, the young turner reached the inn where his brothers had been cheated. He laid his sack on the table before him and began to talk of all the wonderful things which he had seen in the world.
"Yes," said he, "people may easily find a table which will cover itself, a gold ass, and things of that kind, extremely good things which I by no means despise. But these are things in comparison with the treasure which I have won for myself, and am carrying about with me in my sack there."
The innkeeper pricked up his ears.
"What in the world can that be?" thought he. "The sack must be filled with nothing but jewels. I ought to get them cheap too, for all good things go in threes."
When it was time for sleep, the guest stretched himself on the bench and laid his sack beneath him for a pillow. When the innkeeper thought his guest was lying in a sound sleep, he went to him and pushed and pulled quite gently and carefully at the sack to see if he could possibly draw it away and lay another in its place. The turner had, however, been waiting for this for a long time, and now just as the innkeeper was about to give a hearty tug, he cried,
"Out of the sack, Cudgle!"
Instantly, the little cudgel came forth and fell on the innkeeper and gave him a sound thrashing. The host cried for mercy, but the louder he cried, so much more heavily the cudgel beat the time on his back, until at length he fell to the ground exhausted. Then the turner said,
"If thou dost not give back the table which covers itself, and the gold ass, the dance shall begin afresh." "Oh, no!" cried the host, quite humbly. "I will gladly produce everything, only make the accursed kobold creep back into the sack."
Then said the apprentice,
"I will let mercy take the place of justice, but beware of getting into mischief again."
So he cried,
"Into the sack, Cudgle,"
and let him have rest. Next morning the turner went home to his father with the wishing table and the gold ass. The tailor rejoiced when he saw him once more, and asked him likewise what he had learned in foreign parts.
"Dear father," said he, "I have become a turner."
"A skilled trade," said the father. "What hast thou brought back with thee from thy travels?"
"A precious thing, dear father," replied the son, "a cudgel in the sack."
"What?"
cried the father.
"A cudgel? That's worth thy trouble indeed. From every tree thou can cut thyself one."
"But not one like this, dear father. If I say, 'Out of the sack, Cudgel,' the cudgel springs out and leads anyone who means ill with me a weary dance, and never stops until he lies on the ground and prays for fair weather. Look you, with this cudgel have I got back the wishing table and the gold ass, which the thievish innkeeper took away from my brothers. Now let them both be sent for, and invite all our kinsmen. I will give them to eat and to drink, and will fill their pockets with gold into the bargain."
The old tailor would not quite believe, but nevertheless got the relatives together. Then the turner spread a cloth in the room and let in the gold ass, and said to his brother,
"Now, dear brother, speak to him."
The miller said,
"Bricklebrit."
And instantly the gold pieces fell down on the cloth like a thunder shower, and the ass did not stop until every one of them had so much that he could carry no more. I can see in thy face that thou also wouldest like to be there. Then the turner brought the little table and said,
"Now, dear brother, speak to it."
And scarcely had the carpenter said, "Table, cover thyself," Then it was spread and amply covered with the most exquisite dishes. Then such a meal took place as the good tailor had never yet known in his house, and the whole party of kinsmen stayed together till far in the night, and were all merry and glad. The tailor locked away needle and thread, yard measure and goose, in a press, and lived with his 3 sons in joy and splendor. What, however, has become of the goat who was to blame for the tailor driving out his 3 sons? That I will tell thee. She was ashamed that she had a bald head, and ran to a fox's hole and crept into it. When the fox came home, he was met by 2 great eyes shining out of the darkness, and was terrified and ran away. A bear met him, and as the fox looked quite disturbed, he said,
"What is the matter with thee, brother fox? Why dost thou look like that?"
"Ah,"
answered Redskin,
"a fierce beast is in my cave and stared at me with its fiery eyes."
"We will soon drive him out,"
said the bear, and went with him to the cave and looked in. But when he saw the fiery eyes, fear seized on him likewise. He would have nothing to do with the furious beast, and took to his heels. The bee met him, and as she saw that he was ill at ease, she said,
"Bear, thou art really pulling a very pitiful face. What has become of all thy gaiety?"
"It is all very well for thee to talk,"
replied the bear.
"A furious beast with staring eyes is in Redskin's house, and we couldn't drive him out."
The bee said,
"Bear, I pity thee. I am a poor weak creature, whom thou wouldest not turn aside to look at, but still I believe I can help thee."
She flew into the fox's cave, lighted on the goat's smoothly shorn head, and stung her so violently that she sprang up crying, "Meh, meh," and ran forth into the world as if mad, and to this hour no one knows where she has gone. 1 eye, 2 eyes, and 3 eyes. There was once a woman who had 3 daughters, the eldest of whom was called One Eye, because she had only 1 eye in the middle of her forehead, and the second 2 eyes, because she had 2 eyes like other folks, and the youngest 3 eyes, because she had 3 eyes, and her 3rd eye was also in the center of her forehead. However, as 2 eyes saw just as other human beings did, her sisters and her mother could not endure her. They said to her, "Thou, with thy 2 eyes, art no better than the common people. Thou dost not belong to us." They pushed her about, and threw old clothes to her, and gave her nothing to eat but what they left, and did everything that they could to make her unhappy. It came to pass that 2 eyes had to go out into the fields and tend the goat, but she was still quite hungry, because her sisters had given her so little to eat. So she sat down on a ridge and began to weep, and so bitterly that 2 streams ran down from her eyes. And once, when she looked up in her grief, a woman was standing beside her, who said,
"Why art thou weeping, little 2 eyes?"
2 eyes answered,
"Have I not reason to weep, when I have 2 eyes like other people, and my sisters and mother hate me for it, and push me from one corner to another, throw old clothes at me, and give me nothing to eat but the scraps they leave. Today they have given me so little that I am still quite hungry."
Then the wise woman said,
"Wipe away thy tears, 2 eyes,
and I will tell thee something to stop thee ever suffering from hunger again. But say to thy goat, Bleat, my little goat, bleat, cover the table with something to eat. And then a clean, well-spread little table will stand before thee, with the most delicious food upon it, of which thou mayest eat as much as thou art inclined for. And when thou hast had enough, and hast no more need of little table, just say, Bleat, bleat, my little goat, I pray, and take the table quite away. And then it will vanish again from thy sight.
Hereupon the wise woman departed, but Two Eyes thought,
I must instantly make a trial, and see if what she said is true, for I am far too hungry.
And she said,
Bleat, my little goat, bleat, cover the table with something to eat.
And scarcely had she spoken the words than a little table, covered with a white cloth, was standing there, and on it was a plate with a knife and fork, and a silver spoon, and the most delicious food was there also, warm and smoking as if it had just come out of the kitchen. Then Two Eyes said the shortest prayer she knew,
Lord God, be with us always. Amen.
And helped herself to some food, and enjoyed it. And when she was satisfied, she said as the wise woman had taught her,
Bleat, bleat, my little goat, I pray, and take the table quite away.
And immediately the little table and everything on it was gone again.
This is a delightful way of keeping house,
thought Two Eyes, and was quite glad and happy. In the evening, when she went home with her goat, she found a small earthenware dish with some food, which her sisters had set ready for her, but she did not touch it. Next day she again went out with her goat, and left the few bits of broken bread which had been handed to her lying untouched. The first and second time that she did this, her sisters did not remark it at all, but as it happened every time, they did observe it and said, There is something wrong about Two Eyes. She always leaves her food untasted, and she used to eat up everything that was given her. She must have discovered other ways of getting food. In order that they might learn the truth, they resolved to send One Eye with Two Eyes when she went to drive her goat to the pasture, to observe what Two Eyes did when she was there, and whether anyone brought her anything to eat and drink. So when Two Eyes set out the next time, One Eye went with her and said,
I will go with you to the pasture and see that the goat is well taken care of and driven where there is food.
But Two Eyes knew what was in One Eye's mind, and drove the goat into high grass and said,
Come, One Eye, we will sit down, and I will sing something to you.
One Eye sat down and was tired with the unaccustomed walk and the heat of the sun, and Two Eyes sang constantly,
One eye wakest thou, one eye sleepest thou,
until One Eye shut her one eye and fell asleep. And as soon as Two Eyes saw that One Eye was fast asleep and could discover nothing, she said,
Bleat, my little goat, bleat, cover the table with something to eat,
and seated herself at her table, and ate and drank until she was satisfied. And then she again cried,
Bleat, bleat, my little goat, I pray, and take the table quite away.
And in an instant all was gone. Two Eyes now awakened One Eye and said,
One Eye, you want to take care of the goat and go to sleep while you are doing it, and in the meantime the goat might run all over the world. Come,
Let us go home again." So they went home, and again Two Eyes let her little dish stand untouched, and One Eye could not tell her mother why she would not eat it, and to excuse herself said, "I fell asleep when I was out." Next day, the mother said to Three Eyes, "This time thou shalt go and observe if Two Eyes eats anything when she is out, and if anyone fetches her food and drink, for she must eat and drink in secret." So Three Eyes went to Two Eyes and said,
"I will go with you and see if the goat is taken proper care of and driven where there is food."
But Two Eyes knew what was in Three Eyes' mind, and drove the goat into high grass and said, "We will sit down, and I will sing something to you, Three Eyes." Three Eyes sat down and was tired with the walk and with the heat of the sun, and Two Eyes began the same song as before and sang,
"Three Eyes, are you waking?"
But then instead of singing,
"Three Eyes, are you sleeping?"
as she ought to have done, she thoughtlessly sang,
"Two Eyes, are you sleeping?"
and sang all the same,
"Three Eyes, are you waking? Two Eyes, are you sleeping?"
Then two of the eyes which Three Eyes had shut and fell asleep, but the third, as it had not been named in the song, did not sleep. It is true that Three Eyes shut it, but only in her cunning to pretend it was asleep too. But it blinked and could see everything very well. And when Two Eyes thought that Three Eyes was fast asleep, she used her little charm.
"Bleat, my little goat, bleat. Cover the table with something to eat."
And ate and drank as much as her heart desired, and then ordered the table to go away again.
"Bleat, bleat, my little goat. I pray, and take the table quite away."
And Three Eyes had seen everything. Then Two Eyes came to her, waked her, and said,
"Have you been asleep, Three Eyes? You are a good caretaker. Come, we will go home."
And when they got home, Two Eyes again did not eat, and Three Eyes said to the mother,
"Now I know why that high-minded thing there does not eat. When she is out, she says to the goat, 'Bleat, my little goat, bleat, cover the table with something to eat.' And then a little table appears before her, covered with the best of food, much better than any we have here. And when she has eaten all she wants, she says, 'Bleat, bleat, my little goat, I pray, and take the table quite away.' And all disappears. I watched everything closely. She put two of my eyes to sleep by using a certain form of words, but luckily the one in my forehead kept awake."
Then the envious mother cried, "Dost thou want to fare better than we do? The desire shall pass away." And she fetched a butcher's knife and thrust it into the heart of the goat, which fell down dead. When Two Eyes saw that, she went out full of trouble, seated herself on the ridge of grass at the edge of the field, and wept bitter tears. Suddenly, the wise woman once more stood by her side and said,
"Two Eyes, why art thou weeping?" "Have I not reason to weep?" she answered. "The goat which covered the table for me every day when I spoke your charm has been killed by my mother, and now I shall again have to bear hunger and want."
The wise woman said,
"Two Eyes, I will give thee a piece of good advice. Ask thy sisters to give thee the entrails of the slaughtered goat, and bury them in the ground in front of the house, and thy fortune will be made."
Then she vanished, and Two Eyes went home and said to her sisters,
"Dear sisters, do give me some part of my goat. I don't wish for what is good, but give me the entrails."
Then they laughed and said,
"If that is all you want, you can have it."
So Two Eyes took the entrails and buried them quietly in the evening in front of the house door, as the wise woman had counseled her to do. Next morning, when they all awoke and went to the house door, there stood a strangely magnificent tree with leaves of silver and fruit of gold hanging among them, so that in all the wide world there was nothing more beautiful or precious. They did not know how the tree could have come there during the night, but Two Eyes saw that it had grown up out of the entrails of the goat, for it was standing on the exact spot where she had buried them. Then the mother said to One Eye,
"Climb up, my child, and gather some of the fruit of the tree for us."
One Eye climbed up, but when she was about to get hold of one of the golden apples, the branch escaped from her hands, and that happened each time, so that she could not pluck a single apple, let her do what she might. Then said the mother,
"Three Eyes, do you climb up? You with your 3 eyes can look about you better than One Eye."
One Eye slipped down, and Three Eyes climbed up. Three Eyes was not more skillful, and she might search as she liked, but the golden apples always escaped her. At length the mother grew impatient and climbed up herself, but could not get a hold of the fruit no better than One Eye and Three Eyes, for she always clutched empty air. Then said Two Eyes,
"I will just go up. Perhaps I may succeed better."
The sisters cried,
"You, indeed, with your 2 eyes, what can you do?"
But Two Eyes climbed up, and the golden apples did get out of her way, but came into her hand of their own accord, so that she could pluck them one after the other, and brought a whole apronful down with her. The mother took them away from her, and instead of treating poor Two Eyes any better for this, she and One Eye and Three Eyes were only envious because Two Eyes alone had been able to get the fruit, and they treated her still more cruelly. It so befell that once when they were all standing together by the tree, a young knight came up.
"Quick, Two Eyes," cried the 2 sisters. "Creep under this and don't disgrace us."
And with all speed they turned an empty barrel which was standing close by the tree over poor Two Eyes, and they pushed the golden apples which she had been gathering under it too. When the knight came nearer, he was a handsome lord, who stopped and admired the magnificent gold and silver tree, and said to the 2 sisters,
"To whom does this fine tree belong?
Any one who would bestow one branch of it on me might in return for it ask whatsoever he desired." Then One Eye and Three Eyes replied that the tree belonged to them, and that they would give him a branch. They both took great trouble, but they were not able to do it, for the branches and fruit both moved away from them every time. Then said the knight,
It is very strange that the tree should belong to you, and that you should still not be able to break a piece off."
They again asserted that the tree was their property. Whilst they were saying so, Two Eyes rolled out a couple of golden apples from under the barrel to the feet of the knight, for she was vexed with One Eye and Three Eyes for not speaking the truth. When the knight saw the apples, he was astonished, and asked where they came from. One Eye and Three Eyes answered that they had another sister, who was not allowed to show herself, for she had only 2 eyes like any common person. The knight, however, desired to see her and cried, "Two Eyes, come forth." Then Two Eyes, quite comforted, came from beneath the barrel, and the knight was surprised at her great beauty and said, "Thou, Two Eyes, canst certainly break off a branch from the tree for me."
"Yes,"
replied Two Eyes,
"that I certainly shall be able to do, for the tree belongs to me."
And she climbed up and with the greatest ease broke off a branch with beautiful silver leaves and golden fruit, and gave it to the knight. Then said the knight, "Two Eyes, what shall I give thee for it?"
"Alas,"
answered Two Eyes,
"I suffer from hunger and thirst, grief and want, from early morning till late night. If you would take me with you and deliver me from these things, I should be happy."
So the knight lifted Two Eyes onto his horse and took her home with him to his father's castle. And there he gave her beautiful clothes and meat and drink to her heart's content. And as he loved her so much, he married her, and the wedding was solemnized with great rejoicing. When Two Eyes was thus carried away by the handsome knight, her two sisters grudged her good fortune in downright earnest. "The wonderful tree, however, still remains with us," thought they, "and even if we can gather no fruit from it, still everyone will stand still and look at it, and come to us and admire it. Who knows what good things may be in store for us?" But next morning, the tree had vanished, and all their hopes were at an end. And when Two Eyes looked out of the window of her own little room, to her great delight, it was standing in front of it, and so it had followed her. Two Eyes lived a long time in happiness. Once two poor women came to her in her castle and begged for alms. She looked in their faces and recognized her sisters, One Eye and Three Eyes, who had fallen into such poverty that they had to wander about and beg their bread from door to door. Two Eyes, however, made them welcome and was kind to them and took care of them, so that they both with all their hearts repented the evil that they had done their sister in their youth. The Knapsack, the Hat, and the Horn. There were once three brothers who had fallen deeper and deeper into poverty, and at last their need was so great that they had to endure hunger and had nothing to eat or drink. Then said they, "We cannot go on thus. We had better go into the world and seek our fortune." They therefore set out, and had already walked over many a long road and many a blade of grass, but had not yet met with good luck. One day they arrived in a great forest, and in the midst of it was a hill, and when they came nearer, they saw that the hill was all silver. Then spoke the eldest,
"Now, I have found the good luck I wished for, and I desire nothing more."
He took as much of the silver as he could possibly carry, and then turned back and went home again. But the two others said,
"We want something more from good luck than mere silver,"
and did not touch it, but went onwards. After they had walked for 2 days longer without stopping, they came to a hill which was all gold. The second brother stopped, took thought with himself, and was undecided. "What shall I do?" said he. "Shall I take for myself so much of this gold that I have sufficient for all the rest of my life, or shall I go farther?" At length he made a decision, and putting as much into his pockets as would go in, said farewell to his brother and went home. But the third said, "Silver and gold do not move me. I will not renounce my chance of fortune. Perhaps something better still will be given me." He journeyed onwards, and when he had walked for 3 days, he got into a forest which was still larger than the one before, and never would come to an end. And as he found nothing to eat or to drink, he was all but exhausted. Then he climbed up a high tree to find out if up there he could see the end of the forest. But so far as his eye could pierce, he saw nothing but the top of trees. Then he began to descend the tree again, But hunger tormented him, and he thought to himself, "If I could but eat my fill once more." When he got down, he saw with astonishment a table beneath the tree richly spread with food, the steam of which rose up to meet him. "This time," he said, "my wish has been fulfilled at the right moment." And without inquiring who had brought the food or who had cooked it, he approached the table and ate with enjoyment until he had appeased his hunger. When he was done, he thought, "It would, after all, be a pity if the pretty little tablecloth were to be spoilt in the forest here," and folded it up tidily and put it in his pocket. Then he went onwards, and in the evening, when hunger once more made itself felt, he wanted to make a trial of his little cloth, and spread it out and said, "I wish thee to be covered with good cheer again." And scarcely had the wish crossed his lips than as many dishes with the most exquisite food on them stood on the table as there was room for. "Now I perceive," said he, "in what kitchen my cooking is done. Thou shalt be dearer to me than the mountains of silver and gold." For he saw plainly that it was a wishing cloth. The cloth, however, was still not enough to enable him to sit down quietly at home. He preferred to wander about the world and pursue his fortune farther. One night he met in a lonely wood a dusty black charcoal burner who was burning charcoal there, and had some potatoes by the fire on which he was going to make a meal. "Good evening, Blackbird," said the youth. "How dost thou get on in thy solitude?"
"One day is like another," replied the charcoal burner, "and every night potatoes. Hast thou a mind to have some, and wilt thou be my guest?"
"Many thanks," replied the traveler. "I won't rob thee of thy supper. Thou didst not reckon on a visitor. But if thou wilt put up with what I have, thou shalt have an invitation."
"Who is to prepare it for thee?"
said the charcoal burner.
"I see that thou hast nothing with thee, and there is no one within a 2 hours' walk who could give thee anything."
"And yet there shall be a meal," answered the youth, "and better than any thou hast ever tasted." Thereupon he brought his cloth out of his knapsack, spread it on the ground, and said, "Little cloth, cover thyself." And instantly boiled meat and baked meat stood there, and as hot as if it had just come out of the kitchen. The charcoal burner stared, but did not require much pressing. He fell to and thrust larger and larger mouthfuls into his black mouth. When they had eaten everything, the charcoal burner smiled contentedly and said,
"Hark thee, thy tablecloth has my approval. It would be a fine thing for me in this forest, where no one ever cooks me anything good. I will promise an exchange to thee. There in the corner hangs a soldier's knapsack, which is certainly old and shabby, but in it lie concealed wonderful powers. But as I no longer use it, I will give it to thee for the tablecloth."
"I must first know what these wonderful powers are," answered the youth.
"That will I tell thee,"
replied the charcoal burner.
"Every time thou tappest it with thy hand, a corporal comes with 6 men armed from head to foot, and they do whatsoever thou commandest them."
"So far as I am concerned," said the youth, "if nothing else can be done, we will exchange." And he gave the charcoal burner the cloth, took the knapsack from the hook, put it on, and bade farewell. When he had walked a while, he wished to make a trial of the magical powers of his knapsack and tapped it. Immediately the 7 warriors stepped up to him, and the corporal said,
"What does my lord and ruler wish for?"
"March with all speed to the charcoal burner and demand my wishing cloth back." They faced to the left, and it was not long before they brought what he required and had taken it from the charcoal burner without asking many questions. The young man bade them retire, went onwards, and hoped fortune would shine yet more brightly on him. By sunset, he came to another charcoal burner, who was making his supper ready by the fire. "If thou wilt eat some potatoes with salt, but with no dripping, come and sit down with me," said the sooty fellow.
"No," he replied, "this time thou shalt be my guest."
And he spread out his cloth, which was instantly covered with the most beautiful dishes. They ate and drank together and enjoyed themselves heartily. After the meal was over, the charcoal burner said, "Up there on that shelf lies a little old worn-out hat, which has strange properties. When anyone puts it on and turns it round on his head, the cannons go off as if 12 were fired all together, and they shoot down everything so that no one can withstand them. The hat is of no use to me, and I will willingly give it for thy tablecloth."
"That suits me very well,"
he answered, took the hat, put it on, and left his tablecloth behind him. Hardly, however, had he walked away than he tapped on his knapsack, and his soldiers had to fetch the cloth back again.
"One thing comes on the top of another,"
thought he,
"and I feel as if my luck had not yet come to an end."
Neither had his thoughts deceived him. After he had walked on for the whole of one day, he came to a third charcoal burner, who, like the previous ones, invited him to potatoes without dripping. But he let him also dine with him from his wishing cloth, and the charcoal burner liked it so well that at last he offered him a horn for it, which had very different properties from those of the hat. When anyone blew it, all the walls and fortifications fell down, and all towns and villages became ruins. He certainly gave the charcoal burner the cloth for it, but he afterwards sent his soldiers to demand it back again, so that at length he had the knapsack, hat, and horn, all three.
"Now," said he, "I am a made man, and it is time for me to go home and see how my brothers are getting on."
When he reached home, his brothers had built themselves a handsome house with their silver and gold, and were living in clover. He went to see them, but as he came in a ragged coat, with his shabby hat on his head and his old knapsack on his back, they would not acknowledge him as their brother. They mocked him and said,
"Thou givest out that thou art our brother, who despised silver and gold, and craved for something still better for himself. He will come in his carriage in full splendor like a mighty king, not like a beggar."
And they drove him out of doors. Then he fell into a rage and tapped his knapsack until 150 men stood before him, armed from head to foot. He commanded them to surrender his brother's house, and 2 of them were to take hazel sticks with them and beat the 2 insolent men until they knew who he was. A violent disturbance arose. People ran together and wanted to lend the 2 some help in their need, but against the soldiers they could do nothing. News of this at length came to the king, who was very angry and ordered a captain to march out with his troops and drive this disturber of the peace out of the town. But the man with the knapsack soon got a greater body of men together, who repulsed the captain and his men, so that they were forced to retire with bloody noses. The king said,
"This vagabond is not brought to order yet,"
and next day sent a still larger troop against him. But they could do even less. The youth set still more men against them, and in order to be done the sooner, he turned his hat twice round on his head, and heavy guns began to play, and the king's men were beaten and put to fight.
"And now," said he, "I will not make peace until the king gives me his daughter to wife, and I govern the whole kingdom in his name."
He caused this to be announced to the king, And the latter said to his daughters,
Necessity is a hard nut to crack. What remains to me but to do what he desires? If I want peace, and to keep the crown on my head, I must give thee away.
So the wedding was celebrated, but the king's daughter was vexed that her husband should be a common man, who wore a shabby hat and put on an old knapsack. She wished much to get rid of him, and night and day studied how she could accomplish this. Then she thought to herself,
"Is it possible that his wonderful powers lie in the knapsack?"
And she disassembled and caressed him, and when his heart was softened, she said,
"If thou wouldest but lay aside that ugly knapsack, it disfigures thee so, that I can't help being ashamed of thee."
"Dear child," said he, "this knapsack is my greatest treasure. As long as I have it, there is no power on earth that I am afraid of." And he revealed to her the wonderful virtue with which it was endowed. Then she threw herself in his arms as if she were going to kiss him, but dexterously took the knapsack off his shoulders and ran away with it. As soon as she was alone, she tapped it and commanded the warriors to seize their former master and take him out of the royal palace. They obeyed, and the false wife sent still more men after him, who were to drive him quite out of the country. Then he would have been ruined if he had not had the little hat, but his hands were scarcely at liberty before he turned it twice. Immediately the cannon began to thunder and struck down everything, and the king's daughter herself was forced to come and beg for mercy. As she entreated in such moving terms and promised amendment, he allowed himself to be persuaded and granted her peace. She behaved in a friendly manner to him and acted as if she loved him very much, and after some time managed to befool him that he confided to her that even if someone got the knapsack into his power, he could do nothing against him so long as the old hat was still his. When she knew the secret, she waited until he was asleep, and then she took the hat away from him and had it thrown out into the street. But the horn still remained to him, and in great anger he blew it with all his strength. Instantly all walls, fortifications, towns, and villages toppled down and crushed the king and his daughter to death. And had he not put down the horn and had blown just a little longer, everything would have been in ruins, and not one stone would have been left standing on another. Then no one opposed him any longer, and he made himself king of the whole country. Sweetheart Roland. There was once on a time a woman who was a real witch and had 2 daughters, and one ugly and wicked, and this one she loved because she was her own daughter, and one beautiful and good, and this one she hated because she was her stepdaughter. The stepdaughter once had a pretty apron, which the other fancied so much that she became envious, and told her mother that she must and would have that apron.
"Be quiet, my child," said the old woman, "and thou shalt have it. Thy stepsister has long deserved death. Tonight, when she is asleep, I will come and cut her head off. Only be careful that thou art at the far side of the bed, and push her well to the front."
It would have been all over with the poor girl if she had not just then been standing in a corner and heard everything. All day long she dared not go out of doors, and when bedtime had come, the witch's daughter got into bed first, so as to lie at the far side. But when she was asleep, the other pushed her gently to the front and took for herself the place at the back, close by the wall. In the night, The old woman came creeping in. She held an axe in her right hand and felt with her left to see if anyone was lying at the outside. And then she grasped the axe with both hands and cut her own child's head off. When she had gone away, the girl got up and went to her sweetheart, who was called Roland, and knocked at his door. When he came out, she said to him,
"Hear me, dearest Roland. We must fly in all haste. My stepmother wanted to kill me, but has struck her own child. When daylight comes and she sees what she has done, we shall be lost."
"But," said Roland, "I counsel thee first to take away her magic wand, or we cannot escape if she pursues us." The maiden fetched the magic wand, and she took the dead girl's head and dropped 3 drops of blood on the ground, one in front of the bed, one in the kitchen, and one on the stairs. Then she hurried with her lover. When the old witch got up next morning, she called her daughter and wanted to give her the apron, but she did not come. Then the witch cried, "Where art thou?"
"Here, on the stairs, I am sweeping,"
answered the first drop of blood. The old woman went out, but saw no one on the stairs, and cried again, "Where art thou?"
"Here, in the kitchen, I am warming myself,"
cried the second drop of blood. She went into the kitchen, but found no one. Then she cried again, "Where art thou?"
"Ah, here in bed I am sleeping,"
cried the third drop of blood. She went into the room to the bed. What did she see there? Her own child, whose head she had cut off, bathed in her blood. The witch fell into a passion, sprang to the window, and as she could look forth quite far into the world, she perceived her stepdaughter hurrying away with her sweetheart Roland. "Thou shalt not serve you," cried she. "Even if you have got a long way off, you shall still not escape me." She put on her many-league boots, in which went an hour's walk at every step, and it was not long before she overtook them. The girl, however, when she saw the old woman striding towards her, changed with her magic wand her sweetheart Roland into a lake, and herself into a duck swimming in the middle of it. The witch placed herself on the shore, threw breadcrumbs in, and gave herself every possible trouble to entice the duck. But the duck did not let herself be enticed, and the old woman had to go home at night as she had come. On this, the girl and her sweetheart Roland resumed their natural shapes again, and they walked on the whole night until daybreak. Then the maiden changed herself into a beautiful flower, which stood in the midst of a briar hedge, and her sweetheart Roland into a fiddler. It was not long before the witch came striding up towards them, and said to the musician, "Dear musician, may I pluck that beautiful flower for myself?" "Oh yes," he replied, "I will play to you while you do it." As she was hastily creeping into the hedge, and was just going to pluck the flower, for she well knew who the flower was, he began to play, and whether she would or not, she was forced to dance, for it was a magical dance. The quicker he played, the more violent springs was she forced to make, and the thorns tore her clothes from her body, and pricked her and wounded her till she bled, and as he did not stop, she had to dance till she lay dead on the ground. When they were delivered, Roland said, "Now, I will go to my father and arrange for the wedding. Then, in the meantime, I will stay here and wait for thee," said the girl, "and that no one may recognize me, I will change myself into a red stone landmark." Then Roland went away, and the girl stood like a red landmark in the field and waited for her beloved. But when Roland got home, he fell into the snares of another who prevailed on him so far that he forgot the maiden. The poor girl remained there a long time, but at length, as he did not return at all, she was sad and changed herself into a flower and thought, "Someone will surely come this way and trample me down." It befell, however, that a shepherd kept his sheep in the field and saw the flower, and as it was so pretty, plucked it, took it with him, and laid it away in his chest. From that time forth, strange things happened in the shepherd's house. When he arose in the morning, all the work was already done. The room was swept, the table and benches cleaned, the fire on the hearth was lighted, and the water was fetched. And at noon, when he came home, the table was laid, and a good dinner served. He could not conceive how this came to pass, for he never saw a human being in his house, and no one could have concealed himself in it. He was certainly pleased with this good attendance, but still at last he was so afraid that he went to a wise woman and asked for her advice. The wise woman said,
"There is some enchantment behind it. Listen very early some morning if anything is moving in the room, and if thou seest anything, let it be what it may. Throw a white cloth over it, and then the magic will be stopped."
The shepherd did as she bade him, and next morning, just as day dawned, he saw the chest open and the flower come out. Swiftly, he sprang towards it and threw a white cloth over it. Instantly, the transformation came to an end, and a beautiful girl stood before him, who owned to him that she had been the flower, and that up to this time she had attended to his housekeeping. She told her story, and as she pleased him, he asked her if she would marry him. But she answered, no, for she wanted to remain faithful to her sweetheart, Roland, although he had deserted her. But she promised not to go away, but to keep house for the shepherd for the future. And now the time drew near when Roland's wedding was to be celebrated, and then according to an old custom in the country, it was announced that all the girls were to be present at it and sing in honor of the bridal pair. When the faithful maiden heard of this, she grew so sad that she thought her heart would break, and she would not go thither. But the other girls came and took her. When it came to her turn to sing, she stepped back, until at last she was the only one left, and then she could not refuse. But when she began her song, and it reached Roland's ears, he sprang up and cried, "I know the voice. That is the true bride. I will have no other." Everything he had forgotten, and which had vanished from his mind, had suddenly come home again to his heart. Then the faithful maiden held her wedding with her sweetheart Roland, and grief came to an end, and joy began.